So good evening. Um, Tonight's session is intended to be very informal. It's an opportunity to have some conversation, to ask questions. So with there not being a lot of folks in the room, I think we can suspend the normal 4-minute limit at the podium with the understanding that there's other folks in the room that need to get to the podium. So I would respectfully request that maybe as we go around, maybe limit it to 2 questions. And once everybody has an opportunity, you're welcome to come back up. We are recording this for the purposes of being able to show this on TV4 throughout the coming days. And so as you ask your questions, please come to the podium up front. The reason for that is we have a microphone that will allow the questions to be heard by anybody that happens to be on Zoom, as well as recorded on TV4. So I'm Steve Wade, City Manager for the City of Topeka, and I'm joined up front with our Director of Utilities, and also Nicole Malott, who runs, as Deputy Director, runs all the numbers. Sylvia Davis is to my right, and to my left is Kristen Moorhead. Kristen works in my office at City Hall. So we have 4 questions that have already been submitted online, and maybe what we can start with is just a general overview as to why we're asking for a rate increase from the governing body. We are asking right now a blended increase, so blended being water, stormwater, and wastewater, an increase of 9.85% for 24, 2025, and 2026. The rates for 2023 were approved in December of 2019. That rate request is driven in part through inflation. So we are seeing, as we're projecting out over the next 3 years of 24 through 26, personnel increases that equate to about 10%. We're seeing chemical increases right now running at or above 20% a year. And we're expecting inflationary gains at 3%, which is below, of course, current inflationary levels. One of the questions asked is talking a little bit about our debt services in the city. So utilities is a combination, and Nicole, certainly jump in where I go wrong on this one, is a blend of paid by cash and paid by bond. So we issue debt for projects. And when we look at our debt moving forward, we're expecting regulatory requirements. These are issued by the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, as well as the EPA at a federal level. We're expecting regulatory costs of this rate increase to be almost 1/4 of what we're asking. Certainly the city has a desire and an obligation to provide clean, safe drinking water to its citizens. So we take regulatory compliance very seriously. We also look at the long-term cost of borrowing. So when we issue debt, for every dollar we borrow, you can add about 40 cents on top of that for the cost of interest. In most cases, we issue utility debt, Nicole, at what, 30 years?
Yes.
At 30 years, and so that's the 40 cents that is on top of it. So if you have $1 million project, By the time you've paid it off in 30 years, it's about $1.4 million. So what we try to do on an annualized basis is where we can pay cash, we try to pay cash because obviously that saves the ratepayers long term. So we take that responsibility very seriously also. The number of water main breaks leads us to a discussion that is also driving this rate increase. So best practice in the industry, Sylvia Nicole, is a 100-year replacement cycle. City of Topeka right now is operating under a 170-year replacement cycle. So best practice is 100. We're operating on a 170-year replacement cycle, which means we have pipes in the ground from the 1800s. Yesterday, at end of day, we had just over 25 active main breaks. So as you were driving around the city today, you certainly saw lots of detours. Change of weather affects that greatly, but we had 25 active main breaks yesterday. And I think going into Thanksgiving, if I recall correctly, we were over 30. So certainly the inconvenience to the household with water main breaks and to businesses is substantial. And so we are certainly trying to get beyond that 170-year cycle, closer to the 150-year mark, with aspirations of getting closer to best practice at 100. One of the questions asked was what regulations are required, and I think we touched on that briefly. It's a combination of the Environmental Protection Agency as well as the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Those regulations change on a regular basis, certainly with the goal of good health, clean water. And so we have an obligation to abide by those regulations. A question asked is, why has maintenance been deferred? So one of the reasons we're at the 170-year mark instead of the 100-year mark is there was a period of time in Topeka and lots of other municipalities to where maintenance was deferred. Certainly, when you look at budgets on a year-to-year basis, you've got to figure out what's the right way to spend that money for the taxpayer to provide that benefit. And there was a period of time to where times were lean, and so in some cases decisions were made to defer that maintenance, and that's got us into the situation we're in right now. I think those address the first 4 questions we've been asked. Sound about right?
Yes.
So I'll actually open the podium up to questions from the audience. We also have, I believe, one individual connected by Zoom, and for you, if you can type your chat or your question into the chat window, you can also.
No? Not on Zoom. Gretchen sent something. They're gonna have to speak it on Zoom.
Okay, so I guess raise your hand on Zoom. There's the opportunity to raise your hand. If you go to the bottom of your Zoom box, there is a reactions pull down, and you can do it that way. You'll see an item that says raise hand. You can also activate your video, and that will tell us that you're trying to get in. You can also email any questions, and this certainly goes later in the week also. If you're watching the broadcast, you can email any questions to citymanager citymanager@topeka.org. That's citymanager@topeka.org. And then we are doing one of these again next Wednesday, I believe at noon, in this same room. And so we will address those questions at that point in time. So any questions from the audience?
My name is Stone Juneau. I live off of 24th and Fairlawn. And first of all, I don't envy you for having to sit up here in front of us, but I did have some questions, and I am in favor of rate increases because I know everything goes up and you got to do that. But I just we see things like the half-cent tax increase for our streets, and then we wonder where did that go, why aren't our streets being addressed, and who dipped into that piggy bank outside of the streets department, right? So I guess one of the questions I have is if we're going to raise our rates, and mine's going to go up based on, I have a larger household of nine people, so it's going to be higher.
Sure.
But mine's going to go up $50-some based on the 34.6% increase over the next 3 years for water, 24.25% increase for wastewater, and 21.5% increase for stormwater. So I've calculated that out, and based on my current utility bill, I'm going to see a $54.85 increase. And so I guess what I'm asking is and I realize not everybody has as big a family as I do, but what I'm asking is, can we be assured that the money that we're giving to the city for their needs, that it's going to be used where it's being said it's going to be used? Is it going to be used to improve our infrastructure? Is it going to be used for chemicals and for treatment and things like that, and not used to fund other departments in the city, not used to fund other programs?
Yeah, so the short answer to that is absolutely yes. And I actually want to address your comment about the half-cent sales tax first, if I could.
Sure.
Those funds are protected. They're a restricted fund. They're not accessible to other programs.
Okay.
And we're actually restricted by law as to the way the ballot provision was passed. We can only use it for certain things.
Okay, that's good.
As much as I might want to use that for something else, I absolutely cannot. And it's the same situation here with rate increases for what we're asking here on the utility side. We actually operate utilities separate from the rest of government. And so we don't cross those funds over. And so any rate increase for any of the three utilities, stormwater, wastewater, or water, actually stays where it's at.
Okay.
And those three funds also are kept separate. So stormwater is separate from wastewater, which is separate from regular water. So we're very careful with making sure that stays where it belongs.
Okay. Second question, if you don't care.
Yeah, please.
So what they projected is on average a $9 increase per household. So if you take that $9 per household increase times 54,000 households in the city of Topeka, that comes out to be $5.8 million a year. So that'll be $5.8 million a year every year ongoing. So given the economy and the way it is, and everybody else is struggling with inflation as well, is that something that the city feels they need that much money every year to move forward with this project?
Sure. Let me actually answer it this way. If utilities, if we were to go from that 170-year mark to the best practice, those rate increases wouldn't be just under 10%. They'd be closer to 15. And so certainly we've tried to be very respectful of that ask, and not ask for anything more than what we believe is necessary to maintain regulatory compliance, as well as ensuring that our customer service is where it needs to be.
Okay. I think that's all I have for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we have one from Zoom. Ashara, did I say that right?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. I was curious as to, and I want to make sure I have this correct. I know that there were ARPA funds that are allocated to the city of Topeka. And so my question is, if those funds have been allocated, why are our rates going to be increased? If you can use those funds for the particular things, yeah, I would like to know about that and why that's not being utilized. Because, like the previous person said, maybe he can afford things, but there are certain people in our city that just can't afford a bunch of rate increases, and especially when we have the federal fund. So if you could explain that, I really would appreciate that.
Sure, Ashara, that's actually a great question. Prior to taking this office, I served as the city's finance director. So we did some math back in January and February, studying very closely where we could have the largest impact to the consumer, whether that would be through property tax relief or through a possible decrease in rates. So the 985 might be a little bit less. The math simply said that the impact on utilities was very small. The impact on property taxes was much greater. And so the recommendation made at that time was that we take most of that ARPA money and we put it towards debt avoidance on the GO side. So the city was awarded just under $46 million in ARPA funds. We've allocated about $36 million towards basically avoiding things that we would normally borrow. So take fire trucks, for example, street projects, those things that, again, cost more money when you borrow as opposed to pay cash. That allowed us to not, we actually had a 1 mil decrease on property taxes this year. And so that's the reason why we went there. We also put $10 million of that 46 towards social service programming to try to help our community. And those awards were made earlier this fall. So that's the short reason why.
Maybe on the website, the link to those projects, just.
Yeah, good point. So if you go to topeka.org and you roll to, and I'm going to pull it up so we can walk along here with it. So if you go to topeka.org, you'll see a pull-down menu for
Just scroll down. Sorry. Yeah, it's right there on the home screen.
at the bottom of that main screen, you'll see an item that says proposed utility rate increases for 2024 through 2026. If you click that link, you'll see lots of items on that page. One of those things, it looks like about the fifth question down, says, why are those proposed rate increases higher than what was stated in the ARPA discussions in early 2022? If you click that link, that will take you to the approved, that takes you to an answer, and then there's also, you'll see a hyperlink that says budget document. That takes you to our approved budget for 2023. And if you go to page 207? Page 207, 207, that gives you the link or the idea of what the ARPA funds were spent for. And it's a combination of neighborhood projects, street projects. So there's $36 million of items that are spelled out. Ashar, did that help?
Yes, that was more information, but um, I'm still curious as to why. I mean, I heard what you said, and I saw you explain everything, but I know even though those funds that you're talking about, there were other funds also coming down, and I'll keep listening to understand more, but
Sure. So one of the questions that we've been asked a couple times in open session with the governing body is, are there other grants available that are not ARPA funds? We explore those things actually on a daily basis. What we have found is that as opposed to ARPA money, which was sent directly to the city, most of those new infrastructure grants are going to the state of Kansas. And the state is distributing the money from there. We've applied for several. To this point in time, we have not received any additional money, but what we have received are favorable borrowing rates for additional debt. And so if you look at the rates, if you were to take a mortgage out on a home right now, we pay much less than that through a state fund that is basically subsidized because of these grants. So we're borrowing at about half of what you might pay normally. That issuance, which we are finalizing right now, I think is set to save us about $15 million over the life of those bonds. So in essence, that $15 million savings is coming from federal government. We also have, so when we're talking about the 170-year versus 100-year, we right now, Nicole, correct me here, I believe at least $70 million of deferred infrastructure maintenance.
Water mains, yes.
Water mains, just in water mains, $70 million plus that is outstanding. And so any grant money that we get helps to lessen that $70 million. Most of that grant money is restricted. It can't be used for chemicals. It can't be used for payroll. It can be used for infrastructure. So if we are lucky enough to receive some additional grant money, that's where it will go.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Other questions? Shamika, how are you?
Can you guys hear me okay? Or do I need to?
I may either take it, or I can repeat it, whichever
Okay,
you're more comfortable
hold on.
with.
Sorry, it's still cold outside and my nose is post-nasal drip, sorry. So I am Shamika King Sims. So I have questions, but okay, so the first question that I have is, and you may struggle with the answer to this. With the utility fee refund program that the city has, I'm curious what the success rate or how popular, what the usage has been for that. Are you expecting more people to have to use that program in order to bring down some of that cost? So I'll give you guys space to fill in the answers there.
So let me try to answer it this way. Nicole, Sylvia, certainly correct me if I'm wrong here, but the usage actually has been very robust. So the relief fund for water, I checked on last week. There was just enough money to get to the end of the year on. So there's not money left over, but there has been enough money on the water side to get us through the end of the year. We are, as part of this rate increase, increasing that amount. And so we serve about 500 households right now. This increase would actually take us to, I think, 1,250 households. And that 1,250 households then would be eligible for this fund. Qualifications for that are fairly complex. It's a combination of income.
It's the qualifications of currently the qualifications of the Kansas Homestead program.
Kansas Homestead program. It mirrors those qualifications.
I'm sorry.
To qualify for it, it mirrors the Kansas Homestead Act qualifications.
Okay. I will take your word for it because I'm looking at the application right now.
Yeah,
Right now.
expanding it.
Yeah.
Okay. I would have to look at this more closely. So, will you be increasing the dollar amount that people can have refunded to them as well?
I think right now it's 70.
75?
Yeah, 75. It will go up slightly with the expanded eligibility. We're not able to fully
Right.
increase it yet.
I think it's what goes to 80.
Yeah,
Okay.
per utility.
Yeah. So it's 160 instead of 150.
Okay. Okay. I feel like I have subpoints. Will you be releasing that information around the same time that the decision is made to increase the amount that your rates?
Yeah, we've briefly talked about it in open session with the governing body.
Okay.
Certainly, if the rates are approved, then the program will be rolled out.
Okay. I think I'll say last for now. My last comment is really just a concern about, there was a statement made, I believe, and someone can correct me, audience can correct me, where maybe one of the council members stated that they thought that growing the population would help to cover costs better. And this is not necessarily for you to respond to, but I take issue with that because, as we know, growth just means the demands get higher and the infrastructure is already overtaxed. So I question the wisdom of just hoping that more people will come and that will take care of the money. Like, we have to have a honest conversation about how we budget, how we prioritize, and you mentioned that in the past that the water or the maintenance was deferred because other things were happening. I would like to understand how water is going to be prioritized going forward. Like, is that going to be the very top thing that we discuss and, kind of set our budget around is, how we are able to make it so that people can continue to live here comfortably? Or is it going to fall to the wayside and, for, we'll say, public safety kind of concerns, or what's another one that comes up a lot? That's really the one that's coming to mind. I shared with you that I was very concerned about the public safety budget taking up so much. So I think when the time does come that the decision needs to be made, the public, would like to know how the city plans to prevent this from happening going forward.
So when you say prevent this from happening going forward, what do you mean by that?
I mean, prevent the need for hard choices to be made, to overtake something that's very needed, such as water, clean water. That's my concern, is how do we prevent those choices? How do we prepare ourselves for hard choices going forward?
Yeah, so what I would say is the priorities of the governing body as far as how taxpayer money is spent. Those priorities are openly discussed and typically fairly clear as we go through budget discussions on an annualized basis. And so that's a very delicate balance as to whether one thing has a priority over another. Certainly, public safety is important. Clean water is important. Good roads are important. Social services are important. And so it's a very delicate balance for the governing body. So I wouldn't say that one thing necessarily has a priority over another. we do not commingle the funds from the water side to what I would call general government. Those things are kept very much different. And so on the general fund side, which is a lot of your public safety, your roads, snow removal, those things are funded primarily through a third of it is property tax, a third of it is sales tax, and a third of it is fees. On the utility side, so water, stormwater, and wastewater, those are all funded through basically usage fees. So you're not paying property tax to fund the water side. It's all based on usage. So that way we're able to keep those things separate and not mix and match. Yes?
Okay, I'm going to sit down because I don't want to hog the mic, but you may see me again soon. Thank you.
You bet.
My name is Carol Marple, and I live at 10249 Southwest Wanamaker. And you're saying, well, that's not in the city. I do own a house in the city, so I feel like I'm speaking for the lady that lives there and myself, because I think one of the comments that has not been made is how much water the city sells to the rural water districts. I know of at least 3 that buy water from the city. So I'm basically paying for your maintenance on your lines plus their maintenance on their lines, because Water District 1, 3, and 8 both buy water from the city. So do you have an approximate number of gallons that you sell to the rural water districts?
If you give me a second, I will absolutely pull that up.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and ask my other couple other questions. How many miles this past year in 2022 did you completely replace of water lines within the city?
Great question. I'm going to I have it, just let me pull it up like Nicole's doing. I want to be consistent with what we've shared.
Okay, and then while you're at it, I'd like to know the cost per mile. And is there a definite plan as to where you're going to replace lines at? Because I do understand that the city, which I'm trying to wrap my mind around it because I don't think I've ever seen one, has wood water pipes within the city.
That's correct.
Yes. So are they a priority or what? Is there some kind of plan that you look at and say, we are going to fix X number of miles this year at this location?
Is there a plan? Yes. Is that plan able to be modified? Absolutely.
Right.
So we have issues as they crop up throughout the year that change those priorities. But yes, there is definitely a plan.
Well, when you speak of the water line breaks, if you have this many water line breaks, which granted, you don't repair water line in the winter.
No,
But
we-
if you have to repair what breaks, but you're not going to start a major project to replace X number of miles in this real cold weather. So, I guess, how many miles did you replace this year?
While we're digging that up, let me address your first point. You are not subsidizing the rural water districts.
No, I'm paying for the water, because the first thing they do was when the city raises theirs, they go have a meeting, and I just sat at one
Right.
this month and say, oh, the city's raising their water rates, so we're going to raise accordingly. And then the plan is they're going to come back and say, in a few months, and say, well, now that we've raised the cost of water, we need to raise the cost of running our district. No, I pay the cost of water. what they buy it from you for.
Okay, I apologize. I'm not sure. I think you lost me in the middle of that.
Well, okay, and I'm just going to pick numbers out of the air, and I did appreciate your numbers, very much so. If you raise the rates $9 a thousand,
Yes?
then they go, have their meeting, and they say, the cost of our water is now $9 a thousand more. Do you understand? I'm paying the increase that the city passes on to the water districts.
That's correct. If you are outside the city, absolutely.
Yes. And nobody seems to mention that. But you are collecting money from the rural water districts.
Yes, we are. Absolutely.
Within the county.
Absolutely. So our water system doesn't just serve the city of Topeka.
That's right.
So we
Very
serve-
much so.
We serve about 168,000 people in Shawnee
Yes.
County. Absolutely.
Yes, and that is money that you will collect that will go in addition to what the city people pay.
That's correct.
Yeah. So do you
Yeah,
have,
yes, we have four classifications for customers. The wholesale customers, so those rural water districts outside of the city, accounts for just under 440 million gallons of water.
so, you know, that figures into their budget in addition to what you pay. So that's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
Yeah. And believe me, I hold water for a lot of years. I'm very happy to pay my water bill, but I think that is excessive in the fact that I don't necessarily see a solid plan. You know, we hear often that you need to repair the infrastructure, and that's fine, but give us some hard numbers, some hard places where you're repairing it at.
Thanks. Other questions, comments?
Hi, Danielle Twimlow. Actually wasn't planning on asking anything, but I was curious, do we know the number of water main breaks that we've had even in the last year, like the percentage of them that are those really old ones, or ones that have been recently replaced, or ones that break even though they've been replaced pretty recently? Like, do we just have any sort of percentage? Because I'm wondering, like, have we looked at that? Do we know that is our method that we're doing really sound and sturdy, or are we seeing water main breaks happen over and over again in very similar areas even after we've fixed, repaired, or replaced them? So just curious if we have a number of the percentage of those that are that kind of 150, 170-year-old mark are the culprits of these water main breaks, just out of curiosity. And I don't know if this is a question. I do want to say I appreciate the whole, bringing up other budget as well, because we did have a comparison of how other cities, utility rates were and what they compare to what we do. And so that brings up a valid point that, Lawrence, spends just a little over 20% of their general fund on public safety, and increase those services to other things way more, and we spend 41%. So that is a very valid point. But I'm not really sure if this is a question or how I want to put this, but going back to hearing over and over again that we've clearly had this issue for a very long time, it keeps being kicked and deferred. I don't believe anyone's arguing that it needs to happen. Like, everyone's kind of pretty well aware. It's just really frustrating that this has clearly been an issue, something we've known about, something that has been deferred over and over again. And it was stated at one point that while the property tax, the mill levy, was going to be a greater impact in the short term, that it was going to have less of a long-term benefit, whereas paying off utility rate would kind of have not the biggest impact short-term, but would have a longer long-term benefit. And that was stated in one of the ARPA meetings and presentations that were had. And so if this was so dire and that we knew that the long-term benefit was going to be greater, I just kind of failed to see how this wasn't pressed as a much more urgent thing during ARPA, or even prior to budget discussions, that maybe we needed to look at other things to help offset this so it wasn't such a large burden when we did know that this was coming, or that we did know that this was happening. So I'm not sure that there's necessarily a question in there. It just feels a little frustrating on that end, when this was clearly something we've kind of already known. So I appreciate the fact that we are looking at things every day on ways that we can improve. I think it's very beneficial that just the day after the last city council meeting, the Spark was signed by legislation for distribution. So we will know in February what that process looks like for that money allocation. For specifically, part of that will be for infrastructure, water main, in addition to the infrastructure money that is given federally. So my hope is that we can even have a bit of a delay on this discussion to see where we could be at with those new funds now that there is a timeline for that, that we will know. And we're not going to hit every business fiscal. You know, we have January fiscals, July fiscals, October fiscals. We're going to miss some ones anyways. And so, you know, just pressing that out there that we have that new information as well, which would give a even better timeline on waiting to make decisions.
So a couple things if I could. On your screen right now, if you're on Zoom or here in the room, there's a comparison of what the rates for the city of Topeka would be in 2024 versus what the rates are currently in 2022 for Olathe, Kansas City, Lawrence, Overland Park, Wichita, and Manhattan. So if you look at the residential, our proposed rates in 2024 are in the middle of what the rates are currently for 2022, which are bound to go up. And then on the industrial side, this is the $15 million gallon per month usage customers. You can see that Lawrence and Overland Park are both higher in 2022 than will be in 2024. And then as far as the question on Spark, again, any Spark money or infrastructure money would go towards lessening that $70 million backlog. We're not able to use those things for operational funds. Those grants are always restricted for operational.
But doesn't it then, though, allow whatever we have budgeted for offsetting that be moved to that? I mean, it would still free up money to be adjusted to things, right? I mean, if we've already budgeted to pay down those things, if we're getting dollars to pay it down, then money can shift to reduce that. I mean,
the challenge right now, though, is that we have no way to pay for that $70 million. And so it's not a matter of shifting money. That money doesn't exist as right now. So that $70 million deficit, if you will, that's what we're trying to reduce.
and then I don't have to have the numbers on the right at this moment on the water. I
What-
mean, just at some point if you have.
I made note of that. We can
Yeah,
get that. It's
no
just
problem.
not something I've pulled.
Yeah, no, it's just a curiosity to me that have we looked at, is this maybe a method that we need to look at doing differently? If we're having these over and over again, are we making sure that they're not ones that we have replaced more recently? Are the culprits the older infrastructure absolutely needs to be replaced? That's not the argument. I just want to make sure that we're looking at all the different angles as well, that maybe, because I know I have called in the same one over and over again too, right? And so are we looking at, is this really the issue, or are we needing to look at other things as well, such as methods?
So one thing I could tell you on that one, certainly if we look at the processes that were used in the early 80s versus the processes that are used now, they're much different. And so the processes we're using now, we expect to have a longer lifespan than what we were seeing in the case of stuff used in the early 80s. I can tell you that as of, I think yesterday, year to date, we've had 624 breaks, water main breaks in the city of Topeka for this year. And that compares for full year of 21 of 539 breaks. So 539 in 2021, 624 in 2022. We'll work on trying to get you the breakdown as far as how that splits out.
Yeah, because thinking about method too, like that whole, and I think it got brought up in council meeting, and I don't want to take I know this has been more than 2 questions, I'm so sorry. You know, about doing multiple things at the same time being cost saving. So, you know, thinking about the excessive potholes, right? Like that are sometimes absolute wells, you know, like that has to put pressure on, you know, the weight and effort, you know, just doing that whole process again. So looking at them, what are we doing to prevent it again versus just patching? Are we, you know, that method I think is something that I would like to know more about as well. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nicola Saunders. I live in District 9. This is more of a comment than a question. I just haven't seen it as part of the discussion. So a lot of apartment dwellers in Topeka have their water included in their rent. And I haven't seen a lot of discussion about what this is going to do for rent, because those costs are going to get passed along, just like you were talking about with the rural water districts. And a lot of those sort of gaps, the gap stop refunds for water customers aren't applicable in that scenario. So I just was curious if it's really part of the discussion at all, sort of what the trickle down from, not to use a water pun, sorry, it's really going to be from all of, you know, from all of this as it shakes out for residents of Topeka who don't live in homes.
We definitely keep that into consideration, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Other questions, comments?
Another question. Sorry. I'm curious, how many crews do you have working on water repair lines?
That differs per day.
So, has there ever been any thought to, when you're redoing a street completely, because I think the one that comes to my mind is we just had redone the street, I believe it was 21st and Wanamaker, and shortly thereafter we had to tear up the street because the water line broke. I mean, are they working hand in hand with repairing, when you repair a street, repair the water line?
We made that philosophical shift several years ago, and we do definitely work in coordination between the two departments.
Okay, but do you have the answer about how many miles of water line you've replaced?
We're working on it.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's, it seems like it should be an easy answer, but because we have projects that are still not completely closed out, it's just making that a little bit, I want to get you an accurate number.
Okay,
So,
okay, because you know, it's just like with the potholes. If we can see where something's been done, that's a little easier to take when you're paying for it.
Understood.
sure.
Okay.
And I would add, you know, to your question, we are experiencing short staffing in the distribution unit, but we have pulled from other units. For instance, folks out of the WPC groups have been assisting where we can. We're utilizing private contractors to help with some of this work when we do get overloaded, and then trying to figure out how we can expand and what are the challenges with hiring right now, and how can we build up those teams again, and the balance of who's working when, and making sure we have when we think it's going to be a really busy time of year, when the temperatures look like it's going to be pretty awful, we want to double up those crews so that we can get more folks out. However, when they are responding to those emergency breaks, they're putting Band-Aids on, right? There's a break and they're putting a sleeve. or something of that nature to repair that break at that moment. They're not replacing large chunks of line. That's the difference in why are we still seeing breaks in some of the same areas, because we're not replacing long lengths of pipe when they're out doing those emergency repairs. And that's where that balance is. We've got to be able to make some headway on that long line replacement so that we don't see some of those reoccurring impacts to customers in the same areas over and over.
Because I'm going to make sure we use up our time tonight. So I was able to look more closely at the current guidelines for the franchise fee refunds. The one that kind of gives me pause is applicant qualifying due to age must be 55 years of age. Okay, let's see. A parent qualifying due to dependent children who are under 18 years of age must provide all birth certificates or hospital letters and social security cards for all children in a household. I have concerns about that being prohibitive. And I understand that maybe some of these rules you, as a city, have very little control over. I just worry that people who will need assistance won't be able to get assistance. So, you know, as you're, again, going through this process and looking at it from a multitude of ways, thinking about how it could be prohibitive for people. And actually, Mikola made a great point. I live in a house, and I'm a renter. So it's highly likely, as much as I love my landlord, he's probably going to pass that cost along to me, as well as recycling, if, you know, that comes up. And I'm already pretty much at my limit. So thinking about how this is going to impact people who feel like they already don't have a whole lot of agency, I think, you know, trying to keep that at the top of your mind as you're talking about this in different settings. So thank you.
Thanks. Anything else? Any other questions, comments? Okay.
Just a final thought that, you know, as we go through this poor economy right now, and we see this high inflation and everything, just keep in mind that, you know, with the grocery taxes going up, the price of groceries, property taxes, mine almost went up $800 this year from what it was last year. People paying more for rent and higher interest rates to buy a home. All these things are expenditures that people are having to pay. So I just, you know, would ask that you guys, you know, make sure that you're checking, and I'm not saying you're not, just make sure that, you know, you're being diligent to use the taxpayers' money wisely, because I know, you know, in the end, we all want to reach the end goal of whatever that may be, but it gets harder and harder when you're constantly shelling out more and more in different areas. So that's all.
Thanks. Last chance. Anything else? Taylor, have you seen anything else come in? No, sir. All right. If there's no other comments, I think we'll finish for the evening. And again, there'll be one of these next Wednesday at noon in this same room. So thanks very much.